Rising optimism, a family overjoyed after Nelson Mandela is discharged from hospital in South Africa. The United Nations Special Envoy to the Great Lakes region is expected in the strife-torn eastern end of the DRC. That's an emphatic note to religious extremism. Thousands of Ethiopians marched in the streets to oppose sectarianism. Hello there, welcome to Africa Live, CCTV's new program that brings you African and global news from all perspectives. I'm Ramanyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Here's what's coming up in the next 30 minutes. There's quite a bit of relief for South Africans as fuel pump attendants and auto workers postpone strikes for more talks. And in sports, hometown hero Greg Minnaar's gold medal offers the perfect closing to the Mountain Bike World Championships in South Africa. Now let's start this broadcast in South Africa, where the former president of that country, Nelson Mandela, returned to his home in Houghton in Johannesburg on Sunday after nearly 3 straight months in hospital. That said, though, authorities in South Africa say that the health of the 95-year-old anti-apartheid icon does remain critical and sometimes is quite unstable. President Jacob Zuma's office said he will continue to receive the same level of intensive care as he received in the hospital, administered by the exact same team of doctors. Mandela was admitted for the 4th time over the past year on the 8th of June for what the government described as a recurring lung infection. Well, one of his daughters, Makaziwe Mandela, had this to say as she left her father's home.
But we're happy that he's home. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very brief comments there from Makaziwe Mandela. Now let's take a look at her father's medical history. He contracted tuberculosis during his 27-year stint in prison for opposing apartheid. Now this is thought to be the root cause of a recurring lung infection for which he was admitted last year, as well as to have gallstone surgery. A couple of months later, Mandela was again admitted for a long-standing abdominal complaint. He also underwent laparoscopy, also known as keyhole surgery. This year, Mandela has spent his longest time in a hospital yet, a total of 87 days yet again for a lung infection. Now, of course, he's back home and his general health, as we mentioned earlier, does remain relatively unstable, according to the authorities in South Africa. Now let's move on to the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the United Nations Special Envoy to the Great Lakes region is due to visit the strife-torn eastern city of Goma. Mary Robinson is trying to push through a framework peace agreement and is also set to visit Uganda and Rwanda later this week. Now her visit follows heavy fighting around Goma in recent days, and CCTV's Jane Kyo filed this report from Muningi near Goma.
It could be a Sunday service anywhere in Africa, but Fikiri Batenga and Manilio Janine are not just here for worship. This church is their home. It has been for the past 4 months. On a day like this, their belongings and those of many others are pushed aside to make room for the service. The two women are from Kibati, a village just north of Goma. Government forces backed by UN troops have been fighting M23 rebels, the latest chapter in a rebellion that stretches back 18 months, and Kibati has suffered some of the worst clashes.
M23 stole from us. If you go to the farm, they beat you. Some rape women, that's why I'm here.
They kidnapped our men and we've never seen them since. Going to the farm became dangerous.
Church officials tell us at least 500 people call this their home. Many fled here from surrounding villages. While the church may have offered a safe refuge, it can offer nothing more. Food, clean water and sanitation are a luxury.
We had to open our doors to the women, children and the old. That's all we could and can do, but they are suffering. They sleep on the floor and they have no food.
Many here feed themselves by finding odd jobs in nearby Goma or through handouts. But for all the hardship, few here want to go home. I have no home to go back to. By now it's been demolished. Well, the UN says more than 500,000 people have been displaced since the rebellion by the M23 began last year. And now with the latest flare-up, the figures keep growing. But with the changing dynamics by the international community, many are now hopeful for a better tomorrow.
We want peace because once there is peace, people will go back to their homes.
The rebels withdrew late last week and called for talks. Now that has raised hopes here of an end to the violence. But until there's peace, Manilio, Fikiri and many others must pray and try to sing away their troubles. Jane Chaos, CCTV, Munigi in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Let's get back slightly here to our top story. The story, of course, of Nelson Mandela going back to his home in Johannesburg. For more on that story, CCTV's Renee Del Camna joins us live from outside Mr. Mandela's home in Johannesburg. Renee, quite the sigh of relief here after Mandela's lengthy stay in hospital. What more do we know about his current medical condition?
Well, we're told by the doctors through the South African presidency that Nelson Mandela is still in a critical but stable condition, and that at times his condition becomes unstable. So this is not a matter of Nelson Mandela being discharged from hospital and South Africans are saying that's great, he's probably on the road to recovery. People are still really concerned about Nelson Mandela's health status. We are told that he will be receiving intensive care treatment at a special intensive care unit built at his home. So in a sense, he is still a 95-year-old man, critically ill in hospital. In a sense, he's still in hospital. It's just that this time his hospital is at home with his family.
Let's move away from the medical bits, though. The media has been accused of hounding Mr. Mandela and his family during his hospitalization. Now, how is his treatment at home likely to be covered by the press, both local and international?
Well, yes, the focus of the Nelson Mandela story has now moved largely from the hospital in Pretoria to his home in Houghton, right near Johannesburg. Plenty of media people there. In fact, once I've done talking to you, I will be heading there with a cameraman myself. Plenty of people really interested in the Nelson Mandela story, because you have to remember his great status in the world, his iconic status, and how much he is loved in the world is holding the media attention, and Nelson Mandela will be continually covered because people love him so much right across the globe. Former South African president, but remember he started out as the world's most famous political prisoner, then became a peacemaker and president, and people continue to be inspired by him. Just the other day when I was at the hospital, there were international tourists out.
Indeed, it does seem that we have lost that connection right there. But that was CCTV's Renee Del Camna live in our studios in Johannesburg. We'll, of course, have more coverage of Mr. Mandela's recovery at home and, of course, his treatment in subsequent bulletins. Time for a short break right now. Here's what's coming up next. A divided house. 22 representatives of Arab countries failed to produce any breakthrough on the Syrian crisis. And a pretty emphatic note to religious extremism. We'll have the details as thousands of Ethiopians march in the streets to oppose religious divides.
We follow the latest trends in global politics, economics, culture and sport, and how Africa fits into the global picture. You decide what's important.
We need some trade and justice.
Africa's future will be determined by Africa.
For women's equal opportunity, for a better life.
We have to change something, and it's not the outsiders.
Talk Africa, a new voice for the world.
Welcome back. Egypt's army-backed interim government referred the ousted president Mohamed Morsi for trial on Sunday to face charges of inciting murder and violence. Now, that move comes as authorities there escalate a crackdown on the Muslim Brotherhood, which has seen 14 other members facing trial on pretty much the same charges. Now, those relate to violence in which around a dozen people were killed outside the presidential palace last December, following a decree issued by Morsi that expanded his powers. Now, the move sparked protests that ended in one of the most violent episodes of his presidency, when the Brotherhood's leaders called on members to rally to Morsi's defense. Charges against Morsi, who has been held at a secret location since he was deposed in July, include inciting his followers to commit crimes of premeditated murder and the use of violence and thuggery. Morsi is also being investigated over his escape from jail during the 2011 uprising against Hosni Mubarak. Now to something with a regional slant to it. The 22-state Arab League held an emergency meeting in Cairo on Sunday to discuss a possible military strike against Syria. Now, this comes in the wake of an alleged use of chemical weapons in the suburbs of Damascus almost 2 weeks ago. With the details, here's CCTV's Adel Makhrouki.
While Western nations have been deliberating their next move on Syria, members of the Arab League held their first meeting on the issue Sunday. As expected, the member states proved to be divided. The only agreement that something must be done to end the crisis.
We join the Syrians in their demands from the international community with the means required to stop the bloodshed. We can't just keep condemning. We want the international community with all its capabilities to stop this aggression before they perish.
Egypt stressed several times since the revolution began that meeting the aspirations of Syrian people won't happen except with a political solution. We strongly object to militarize the revolution to respond to a tyrant regime.
The divisions among the delegates were clearest among Iraq, Algeria and the Syrian National Coalition, or the SNC, a coalition of Syrian opposition groups.
There is no doubt that our condition from what your brothers suffer in Syria and the world seek to punish the regime pushes me to ask for your fund and support to direct a military strike to the machine of murder and terror.
And yet, from Iraq and Algeria came objections to earlier condemnations of the alleged use of chemical weapons by the Syrian government. Until the United Nations issued its final report, judgment should be withheld. 22 representatives of Arab states failed to yield a breakthrough for the Syrian crisis. Instead, they exposed their division. Adel Mahroui, CCTV, Cairo.
Let's take it to the Horn of Africa now, where a demonstration in the Somali capital of Mogadishu in support of the recent agreement between the self-established Jubaland administration and the central government signed in Addis last week took place this weekend. Now, the Somali government promised that it will push for similar agreements between all regions in the federal setup and the central administration in Mogadishu. Now, the agreement signed between Kismayo and Mogadishu was brokered by Ethiopia, and it could see an end to hostilities between warring factions who have been looking to control that port city.
The agreement in Addis Ababa is part of the government's plan to reconcile all the regions in this country. The government will continue with unity efforts to ensure that we are all in harmony.
In recent years, Ethiopia has been experiencing mounting threats of religious extremism. There have been some suspected underground activities for quite some time now in cities like the capital, Addis Ababa. In order to stress that the country is not ready to embrace this, thousands of Ethiopians took to the streets on Sunday. CCTV's Gurum Chala was there.
The biggest square in Addis Ababa packed with tens of thousands of demonstrators who came from all corners of the city, all speaking with one voice, condemning the recent threats of religious extremism in the country.
As we can see, there is a situation here, and this is a threat for our very existence. And I believe religion can only exist when there is peace.
Those extremists do not actually face difficulties. Only the poor are affected by the deeds of the extremists, and we should not act with emotion.
Since last year, some Muslims in Ethiopia, especially in the capital Addis Ababa, have been staging uprisings mostly around mosques against what they call government interference in their religious activities. But the government says there is a hidden agenda of trying to establish Muslim state in the country via extremism.
The number of people who involved themselves in this extremism are not very large, small number. But they try to show themselves that they are very big, but I don't think it will be a big danger, but we have to control from the beginning.
The religious leaders who participated in the demonstration believe extremism is a clear and present danger that faces Ethiopia.
It's actually a problem at the moment in our country. We are facing it in different, it's expressing itself in different situations. And to the extent they have passed the state of extremism and went beyond that. So it is a real and imminent danger for our country.
The issue of religious extremism has become a concern to many African countries, including Ethiopia. The joint demonstrations here send a clear message that this country is saying no to extremism. Grumtala, CCTV, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Now let's take it back to Egypt, where of course there are two key stories we're following in that country. The first, of course, is a referral of the former president Mohamed Morsi for trial to face charges of inciting murder. And the second, of course, was a meeting of the Arab League over in Cairo. With the details on both stories, we're now joined by CCTV's Adel Makhrouhi. He's live in the Egyptian capital of Cairo. Adel, Morsi set to face charges here of of inciting murder and violence. Do we have any more data on when that trial is likely to start?
Well, yes, just yesterday his files of accusations have been transmitted to the criminal court and therefore a new verdict of holding him for 15 days in detention on investigations for the charges of inciting violence has been issued. So from now on, investigations will start officially in one of the criminal cases that President Morsi is accused of, and this only means that from the preliminary investigations of the prosecution, they found enough evidence to convince the court to hold a trial, and therefore this is just the beginning. So within the coming few days we expect a new date for this trial to be set by the criminal court, and to also identify where the president or the ousted president will be held in trial. It seems so far that this might also be the same location which is the most secured facility, the newly established court at the police academy, where former President Hosni Mubarak has also been going there for his criminal courts and corruption cases as well. But so far we don't have exact information about these timings, but we know for a fact that the court is convinced that it is worth a trial, the first files that has been sent by the prosecution.
Indeed. With regard to the story about Syria, however, do we have any more information on the Arab League's deliberations after Sunday, of course?
Yes, the Secretary General has held today, earlier this morning, a press conference to give more details on the meetings that were held yesterday at the Arab League. There were a delegates meeting and a foreign ministers meeting, all concentrating and focusing on the Syrian crisis. The Arab League said that it was very keen to reach a political solution to the Syrian crisis. However, it now says that all these efforts have failed and there has been no production or no positive steps been taken so far with all the international efforts, including the Geneva talks. And while they were waiting for a Geneva II series of sessions, it doesn't seem that they will be held soon. He said that also, the Secretary General said he doubts that the Security Council would be able to give a serious resolution to end the bloodshed in Syria, and he basically held the veto rights responsible. He said that there are no guidelines to the use of veto, and therefore as long as one of the five powers holding the veto in the Security Council or the permanent members taking a supporting position toward the Syrian government, then the Security Council as well will not be over. But they are still looking forward to the final report of the UN's inspection team, and they said that some intel that came to Arab countries' intelligence sources confirms that there has been a use of chemical weapons, but all of this also still under the final call by the United Nations, which might give it more room for them to decide what to do. But from now until this moment comes, the Arab League gave the green light for its member states. If they wish, they can support the opposition with military and armed facilities that would balance out the power in this battle, according to his words.
Indeed, we'll have to leave it there for the time being. Thank you very much for that update. That's CCTV's Adel Mahrouki over live in Cairo with the latest details on developments, of course, with regard to Syria and the impending trial of Egypt's former head of state, Mohamed Morsi. Let's go back to the other end of the continent now. Nearly 1,000 women from South Africa's ruling African National Congress Women's League gathered in the Western Cape Provincial Building in the heart of Cape Town to start a 2-hour march in the city. Now, their motive was to highlight the kind of violations that women in this region of South Africa are faced with. Apart from appealing to get involved in decision-making positions, the Women's March also aimed at highlighting social challenges which women and children face in South Africa, particularly in the Western Cape. Both women and children in the area have become a vulnerable group. They face significant violations like sexual assaults, domestic violence, high unemployment and poverty, among others.
We're protesting here today against the fact that women are excluded from Helen Zille's cabinet. She only has 70% white men within her cabinet and no women at all. We are saying that women must be part of their own development. Women are in the majority in this province. 53% of the population consists of women, and therefore women must be represented.
20 minutes into the hour, it's time for a short break. Here's what's coming up in business. Quite a bit of relief for South Africans as fuel pump attendants and auto workers postpone their strike for more talks. We'll have the details when we come back.